Hello and welcome. As you can tell by the title, I'm the obsessed movie man, O.M.M. Growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, a lot of people were talking about The Mummy. The Brendan Fraser one. They talked about how scary and horrifying it was, while also saying that it was a lot of fun. For whatever reason, I didn't feel inclined to see it, and as the years went on, I started to get into the Universal monsters, and ended up watching the original Mummy film with Boris Karloff. With the release of the new film, I thought it would be fun to review the one that started it all, because there are tons of people who still think that the Brendan Fraser film is the original film, which I think is unfortunate, because while I find the Fraser film to be mediocre, the Karloff film is a bit better. Wait a minute, what do you mean by saying it's only a bit better? Well, strap yourselves in and let me explain. An archaeological expedition has uncovered the mummy of Imhotep, along with the scroll of Thoth, which supposedly can bring beings back from the dead. While two members of the group are away, the last one remaining foolishly opens the box that contains the scroll, even though the writings on the box say not to, and as soon as he does that, Imhotep comes to life, takes the scroll, and leaves the man who has now gone insane. Years later, another group of archaeologists find a tomb belonging to a mummy princess with the help of a strange man named Ardith Bey, who, big shocker, is really Imhotep. We discover that he was a high priest who was in love with the princess and tried to bring her back to life, but was discovered and buried alive for his blasphemous crime. Now he sets out to find the reincarnation of his love and transform her into a living mummy just like himself. That's a lot of information, and if you're thinking it sounds a lot like the Fraser film, the whole Imhotep and his reincarnation of his mummy lover is all that it has in common with this film. The film is not based on any book like Frankenstein, Dracula, or The Invisible Man, but there was a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle book, The Ring of Thoth, that has some similarities. It's really more inspired by the real-life excavation of King Tut and its supposed curse. There are really only two performances worth noting in this film. I say that because while no one does an awful job, it's either very generic or types of performances I've seen before, such as Edward Van Sloan playing his character the same way he portrayed Van Helsing and Dr. Waldman in Dracula and Frankenstein. The first one is Zita Johann as Helen. Now why am I singling her out? Isn't she playing just another typical love interest type character? Well, yes, but it's how she plays the character. Like Lugosi, she has these hypnotic eyes when she is under a spell, which you can't look away from. She genuinely looks like she is being possessed, and she does have quite a bit of range in the film, which I don't typically see in other female actresses in horror films during this time. Apparently there were more scenes of her reincarnations, but they were cut out to save time, and I think that's for the best. And then there's obviously Boris Karloff as Imhotep the Mummy. This is one of Karloff's first speaking pictures, and he has a great voice for this character. He plays Imhotep as a very fragile man, both in his voice and physicality. Karloff speaks very slowly and acts as if he is selecting every word he says very carefully. He looks like if he were touched even in the softest way he would fall apart, and that is a mixture of Karloff's performance and the makeup work of Jack Pierce. For this makeup, Karloff would arrive at 11 a.m. and Pierce would get to work and apply things like cotton and spirit gum to his face, put clay in his hair, and finally wrap him in bandages. After they were done filming, it took 2 hours to take him out of the makeup. All that for just one scene where you don't even see the mummy walk. It's just a close-up shot of him moving in the sarcophagus, a shot of him picking up the scroll, and then you only see the bandages from his feet move. I think that shows dedication from director Karl Freund, Pierce, and Karloff. Even though they knew this thing would only appear once, they wanted it to look as great as possible so that it could leave an impact. And it still looks fantastic. There are great details put into it. If you look closely at Karloff's arms when he moves, you can see dirt falling from him. And Karloff plays this scene brilliantly, where he very slowly opens his eyes and lets his arms droop down. And there's a lot of build-up to Imhotep's revival. It's truly one of the best scenes in a Universal monster film. The Mummy is also more technically advanced than Frankenstein and Dracula. Though The Invisible Man came out first and did these improvements prior to The Mummy, I think Karl Freund learned a thing or two from director James Whale. Freund was the cinematographer for Dracula, and the shots were pretty basic. James Whale implemented the camera a lot more in Frankenstein and The Invisible Man, as well as adding things like music and transitions, which Freund does here as well. There are a lot of tracking and panning shots, as well as an interesting transition involving Helen. And for a 30s film, The Mummy got away with a lot. During the flashback, we see a man being buried alive, as well as impalements. And not implied impalements, no. You see people being impaled. PG-13 films in the present sometimes have a problem with that. But this film has no problem with it? What the actual hell? So if it seems like I really love this film, why did I say it's only a bit better? I'll elaborate that I don't mean that as an insult at all. In fact, I might not put this film in my top 5 favorite Universal monster films. But my problem is that a lot of this film is very similar to Dracula, be it in the script, filmmaking, and actors used. We have a talisman warding off Imhotep and a cross warding off Dracula. The films open with Swan Lake. Both films have an undead monster in it. In Dracula and the Mummy, Edward Van Sloan plays a character who knows what the supernatural being is, and in both films, David Manners plays the generic love interest to the female who is being pursued by the supernatural being. And in both films, there's a lot of focus on the eyes of the monsters. There are even plot points that are similar. In both films, Edward Van Sloan confronts the monster and talks about how he will kill it. At the end of the film, Van Sloan and Manners rush to a house to save the girl from the monster. The Mummy has a slave under his control, as does Dracula. The girls in both films are under hypnotic trances and seek to escape from being held against their wills by the doctors. There's so much more, and it constantly distracts me. If there were a few similarities, I wouldn't mind it, but honestly, it's a bit much. The film does have a giant flaw, which is its heavy similarities to Dracula, but that doesn't mean the film is bad. I enjoy the craft put into it. Jack Pierce's makeup is top-notch here, and Karloff and Johann are both great in their roles. Sadly, it's the only Mummy film in the original franchise where Imhotep is the Mummy, as all the films afterwards act as a reboot and feature a different Mummy. I say forget those films and unwrap the one that started it all, The Mummy. Thanks, this is an O.M.M review. This is O.M.M, signing out.